My name is Dorothy Whitman. I was 70 years old, a retired high school principal in a small Connecticut town. I had raised 2 children in the same house my late husband Frank and I built together 42 years ago. I paid off every bill myself after he passed. I managed my own investments. I still drove to church on Sundays. I still volunteered at the town library every Thursday morning. I still cooked from scratch and kept my own garden alive through every season. I was not confused. I was not fragile. I was not fading. So when my daughter Nadine raised her glass at my 70th birthday dinner, in my own dining room, at my own table, and said, "The best gift will be the day you're finally gone, Mom," I heard every single word clearly. I understood exactly what she meant. And in the silence that followed, something shifted permanently inside me. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. It was a Sunday evening in early March. The house smelled like pot roast and birthday cake. My granddaughter Becca had made a lopsided cake with pink frosting. My grandson Owen had drawn me a card in blue crayon. They were the only ones around that table who still felt like family. Nadine sat at the far end, already on her second glass of wine. Her husband Warren leaned back in his chair, wearing the half-smile he always wore, the one that never reached his eyes. I had spent years learning not to trust that smile. When Nadine raised her glass and laughed, the room went completely still. Becca stopped chewing. Owen stared at his plate. Warren smirked into his drink without saying a word. Then Nadine added quietly, almost like an afterthought, "Then we can finally sell this house." I set my fork down slowly. I looked at her. I smiled. And in that moment, I made a decision that would take her months to fully understand. After they left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The birthday cake sat half-eaten on the counter. The pink frosting had begun to melt at the edges. The house settled around me the way old houses do, creaking softly, breathing slowly, like something that remembers everything. I replayed every visit over the past 2 years. The way Nadine had started calling more often, not to talk, but to ask careful questions. About the house value. About my savings. About what I planned to do long-term. She had slipped assisted living brochures into my magazine rack 3 separate times. I had thrown everyone away without comment. I thought about how Warren had started walking through the rooms differently. Not like a guest. More like a man quietly measuring walls. They were not worried about caring for me. They were waiting for me to be gone. She had said it out loud. In front of her own children. Without a single moment of hesitation. I sat with that truth in the dark kitchen until I was completely calm. 3 days after the birthday dinner, I found a folder wedged between the seat cushion and the arm of the living room couch, the side where Warren always sat. I almost left it alone, but something told me to open it. Inside was a printed home value estimate from a local real estate office. Market analysis. Comparable neighborhood sales. A handwritten note clipped to the front that read simply, "After estate clears, target spring listing." After estate clears. They had already chosen a season. I stood in my living room holding that folder for a long time. Frank's old reading chair was still in the corner. The bookshelf he had built by hand still lined the far wall. His garden was visible through the back window, the one I had kept alive every year since he passed. I placed the folder on the kitchen table. I took out a fresh notepad, and I wrote down everything I needed to do, in the order I needed to do it. Not out of anger. Out of absolute clarity. The following Monday morning, I called a respected estate attorney named Mr. Halford. I had known of him for years. Steady, careful, thorough. His office was a quiet brick building 2 streets from the library where I volunteered. I made the appointment myself. I drove myself there. I sat across from him and told him everything. The birthday dinner. The folder. The brochures. The questions about the house. I told him calmly, without tears, without dramatics. I simply laid out the facts the way I had once laid out evidence in disciplinary hearings as a school principal. He listened without interrupting. Then he leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Whitman, you have every right to protect what you've built." I told him I wasn't there to punish anyone. I was there to protect myself and everything Frank and I had worked for. We talked for nearly 2 hours. By the time I left, I had a clear plan. Quiet, legal, airtight, and entirely mine. Over the next 2 weeks, I changed everything. My will was rewritten from the ground up. My living trust was restructured. My medical directives were updated with a new healthcare proxy. My old college friend Norma, who lived 3 towns over and had no interest in my property. Most importantly, Nadine was removed as executor of my estate. She didn't know yet. I hadn't told a soul. I simply went about my days the same as always. I tended Frank's garden. I drove to the library on Thursdays. I called Owen and Becca on weekends to hear about their school projects. I kept my voice light and my expression calm whenever Nadine phoned. She called twice that week. Both times she asked how I was feeling. Both times she mentioned very casually that she had been looking into some financial planning resources she thought might help me. I told her I appreciated the thought. I wrote everything down in a small leather journal I kept locked in my bedside drawer. About 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Nadine showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived with a casserole dish and a bright smile I hadn't seen in years. She commented on how nice the garden looked. She offered to help clean the gutters. She poured us both tea without being asked and sat at the kitchen table like she owned it. Then she suggested, very gently, that she help manage my finances. Just temporarily, she said. Just to make things easier. She used the word overwhelming several times, as though my life was overwhelming me. As though I had somehow communicated that. I pretended to consider it. I tilted my head and said I would think it over. She smiled wider. She thought she was winning something. But I was watching every word, every glance toward the back window, every pause near the hallway where Frank's old desk sat. I wrote it all down that evening in my journal. Date, time, exact wording, every single detail. 2 days after Nadine's visit, my bank called. A representative asked me to come in at my earliest convenience to review a request that had been submitted on my account. I drove in the next morning. The branch manager, a polite young woman named Ms. Okafor, explained carefully that someone had submitted a request to be added as a joint oversight contact on one of my personal savings accounts. The request had been flagged automatically because it had not originated from me directly. The name on the request was Nadine Warren. The bank had not approved it. They required my presence and written consent first. I thanked Ms. Okafor. I told her clearly that I had not authorized this request and did not wish to authorize it. I asked her to document my response formally. She did. I drove home in complete silence. I was not surprised. I was not even angry. I was simply more certain than ever that I had made the right decisions. I added the date and details to my journal that evening. I did not confront Nadine about the bank account. I said nothing. Instead, the following week, I returned to Mr. Halford's office with a new purpose. I had decided to place a significant portion of my savings into a charitable trust established in Frank's name. The trust would fund trade scholarships for young people in our county, the kind of practical, skilled work Frank had always believed in. Welding, electrical, carpentry, real work that built real things. The trust was legally binding, irrevocable. Once signed, no family member could contest it, redirect it, or touch it. I signed the documents on a Wednesday morning. Mr. Halford witnessed everything. I felt a deep, steady peace walking back to my car. Frank would have approved. I could almost hear him saying so. The house would come next. I already knew what I wanted to do with it. I just needed the right moment and the right structure. About 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, Nadine organized a family dinner at my house. She invited her Aunt Patricia, 2 cousins, and a neighbor couple who had known our family for years. She framed it as a casual get-together. She cooked, or rather, she brought catered food in containers she transferred to my good serving dishes. Halfway through dinner, she made a joke about when Mom finally downsizes. Everyone laughed the way people laugh when they are not sure if something is funny or not. Awkward and quick. I set down my glass, stood up slowly, and said in my clearest voice, "I have decided not to downsize. I will be staying in this home." The table went quiet. Nadine's smile faltered. She tried to recover, laughing it off, saying she was only teasing, but the color had left her face. I sat back down and picked up my fork. I said nothing else. I didn't need to. The message had been delivered exactly as intended. After that dinner, Nadine changed. The warmth she had been performing dropped away. She became shorter on the phone. When she visited, she moved through the house with a restless energy, opening cabinets, glancing at paperwork on my desk, asking pointed questions wrapped in casual tones. One afternoon, she brought over a document she called a temporary property review form. She said it was just something her financial advisor had recommended. Just a standard review. Just a formality. I read every line. It was not a review. It was a step toward temporary co-ownership. A foot in the door that, once opened, would be very difficult to close. I set the papers back on the table and pushed them toward her. "I won't be signing that," I said. She snapped. Said I was being difficult. Said she was only trying to help. Said I was making everything harder than it needed to be. I kept my voice even. I kept my hands still. I told her I understood her frustration. I made a deliberate choice around this time. I stopped reacting emotionally to Nadine entirely. No arguments. No raised voice. No tears. When she pushed, I stayed still. When she pressured, I simply waited her out. When she became dramatic, I became quieter. I had spent 31 years managing teenagers, angry parents, and difficult staff meetings. I knew how to hold a room with stillness. Nadine found this deeply unsettling. She had always known how to read me, how to find the tender spot and press it until I gave in. But when there was nothing to press against, she didn't know what to do. She told Warren I had become cold. She told her cousin I was acting strange. She called me twice in 1 week just to test whether I would crack. I didn't. I wrote down every call in my journal. I noted the time, the tone, the words she used. I was building something she couldn't see yet, and I was building it carefully. In late April, I received a call from my longtime doctor, Dr. Fleming. His tone was gentle but careful. He told me that a family member had reached out to his office expressing concerns about my cognitive health. The family member had used the phrase, "noticeable decline." He asked if I would be willing to come in for a general wellness visit. I said yes immediately. I also told him I wanted a full, independent cognitive evaluation, the most thorough one available, documented and placed formally in my medical file. I took the evaluation the following week. 3 hours. Memory, reasoning, language processing, problem solving. A second physician reviewed the results independently. I passed with scores Dr. Fleming described as well above average for any age group. He gave me a full written report. I made 3 copies. One went to my attorney. One went into my fireproof home safe. One I placed in a plain envelope in my bedside drawer, next to my journal. Nadine's face when she eventually learned about the evaluation told me everything I needed to know. It was a Thursday morning in early May. I had come home from the library and was putting away groceries when I heard Nadine's voice coming from the back of the house. She had let herself in. She still had a key, and was on the phone in my kitchen, speaking in a low, urgent voice. I stood in the hallway and listened. She and Warren were in serious financial trouble. Credit card debt. A failed business investment Warren had made 18 months ago that she had apparently hidden from most of the family. They were behind on 2 loans. Their lifestyle, the vacations, the private school tuition for Owen and Becca, the new car Warren had bought the previous fall, had been quietly built on the assumption that this house would be theirs within a few years. They were not worried about me. They were drowning, and they needed my home as a life raft. I stood in the hallway until she finished the call. Then I quietly put the rest of the groceries away and said nothing. That evening, I called Mr. Halford. I sat in Mr. Halford's office and told him what I wanted to do with the house. He listened. He asked a few questions. Then he said, "That is one of the most thoughtful decisions I have seen in 30 years of estate law." I had decided to place the house into a legacy housing trust. The terms were specific and legally sealed. Upon my passing, the property would be converted into transitional housing for widowed women over the age of 60, women who had lost their homes or their financial footing after losing a spouse. It would be managed by a local nonprofit I had already identified and spoken with quietly. Nadine could not contest it. There was no loophole. The documentation was thorough, witnessed, and filed correctly. The trust could not be broken by a family challenge because I had not been coerced, was not cognitively impaired, and had taken every reasonable legal precaution available. Frank built this house with his hands. It would go to women who needed it. 2 weeks after the trust was finalized, Nadine came over on a Saturday morning. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap, the posture she used when she was preparing to be persuasive. She asked me directly when I planned to sign the transfer papers. Her tone was careful, almost patient, as if she had rehearsed it. I looked at her calmly and said, "I already signed something." Her eyes lit up immediately. The tension in her shoulders dropped. She leaned forward slightly with a smile that was almost relieved. She thought she had finally won. She thought the waiting was over. I let her sit with that feeling for a moment. Then I reached across the table and placed a sealed envelope in front of her. The envelope did not contain the full details of the housing trust. Not yet. It contained one document, the amended executor paperwork showing that Nadine had been formally removed from that role. I watched her open it. I watched her read it. I watched the smile disappear. She looked up at me with something between confusion and panic. "What did you do?" she asked. I folded my hands on the table. I kept my voice gentle and steady. "I made sure I won't be a burden," I said. She stared at me. She turned the document over, as if there might be something on the back that changed the meaning. There wasn't. "Who is the executor now?" she asked. I told her it was Mr. Halford's office, acting in a trustee capacity, with oversight from the nonprofit I had chosen. She said nothing for a long time, and in that silence, I saw the moment she understood that the ground beneath her plan had shifted completely. The calm didn't last. Within minutes, Nadine was on her feet. Her voice rose quickly, sharp and cracking at the edges. She called me manipulative. She called me selfish. She said I was punishing her for nothing. She said I had always favored the wrong people over family. She said I was choosing strangers over my own daughter and grandchildren. I sat still through all of it. I did not raise my voice. I did not look away. When she finally stopped, I spoke one sentence. "You chose money over your mother first." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes filled, not with sadness, I thought, but with the particular frustration of someone who has realized they are not going to win an argument they believed was already settled. She picked up her bag. She told me I would regret this. She walked out and pulled the door harder than necessary behind her. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. I looked out the back window at Frank's garden. The early roses were beginning to come in along the fence line, just the way he had planted them. Word spread through the family within days, the way these things always do. Nadine had told her version first, which framed me as confused, erratic, and unfairly influenced by my attorney. She used the word manipulated more than once when describing my decisions to relatives. Mr. Halford anticipated this. He had already offered, and I had agreed, to hold a formal family meeting at his office. My nephew William came. My sister-in-law June came. 2 cousins attended. Nadine and Warren sat on one side. I sat beside Mr. Halford. He walked through every document. The timeline, the trust structure, the cognitive evaluations, the estate changes. He presented each item clearly, without editorializing. There was no confusion in that room. There was no evidence of manipulation or impairment. There was only a 70-year-old woman who had made thorough, legal, carefully considered decisions about her own life and property. By the time Mr. Halford finished, no one in that room had any remaining questions about my state of mind. After the family meeting, Warren approached me privately in the parking lot. Nadine had stayed inside talking to her cousin. It was just the two of us beside my car in the cool afternoon air. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The confident lean he always carried was completely gone. He told me they had loans. He told me the business losses had been worse than he had let on. He told me they had been counting on the inheritance as a bridge, his exact word, to get through the next few years. He asked if there was any way we could work something out. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Warren, you should never spend money that does not belong to you." He had no response to that. He nodded once, the way someone nods when they know an argument is finished and they lost it before it began. I got in my car and drove home. The consequences came steadily over the following months. Nadine and Warren sold their second car first, the new one Warren had bought the previous fall. Then Owen and Becca were quietly pulled from the private school they had attended since kindergarten and enrolled in the local public school. The vacation they had booked for that summer did not happen. The home renovation plans they had apparently been drawing up for my house were shelved permanently. I heard about most of this through the family grapevine, through June mostly, who still called me every Sunday. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. It was more like the particular sadness of watching someone experience the consequence of a decision they made a long time ago and refused to revisit until it was too late. They had built an entire financial life on the assumption that my house was already theirs, that I was already gone in every way that mattered. They had been wrong, and now they were living inside that wrongness every single day. In July, Becca came to visit on her own. She was 12 years old, and she had asked her father to drop her off, which surprised me. She arrived with a small bunch of flowers she had clearly picked from someone's front yard along the way, slightly wilted, wrapped in a paper towel. She handed them to me at the door and then hugged me so tightly and for so long that I had to steady myself against the doorframe. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry Mom says mean things about you," she said. I held her face in my hands. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her she was one of the best people I knew and that was entirely her own doing. We sat in the garden for 2 hours. I showed her how to check the roses for aphids. She told me about her new school and a teacher she already liked. Somewhere during that afternoon, the story I had been telling myself, the one about protection and principle and standing firm, quietly became about something simpler. It became about her. About making sure she had something real to inherit. Not property. Character. In late August, Nadine filed a formal legal inquiry attempting to challenge the housing trust on the grounds of undue influence. Her attorney argued that Mr. Halford had overstepped and that I had been in a vulnerable emotional state when the trust was established. The challenge failed within 2 weeks. Mr. Halford had been meticulous from the beginning, precisely because he had anticipated this. The cognitive evaluations were on file. The timestamps on every document showed a clear, months-long decision-making process. 3 independent witnesses had been present at the trust signing. There was documentation of the real estate folder, the unauthorized bank account request, and the assisted living appointment Nadine had scheduled without my consent. Her attorney apparently advised her that continuing to pursue the challenge would be costly and had no realistic chance of success. She dropped it. I learned this on a Tuesday morning over my second cup of coffee. I wrote the date in my journal. Then I closed the journal, placed it back in the drawer, and went out to check the garden. In September, Nadine came alone. No Warren. No prepared speech. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where so much had already been said and unsaid between us. She was quieter than I had ever seen her. The fight was gone. What was left looked a lot like bitterness. The kind that has nowhere left to go. She said, "You chose strangers over me." I let the words sit in the air for a moment. Then I answered her as honestly as I could. "No," I said. "I chose people who did not wait for me to die." She looked at the table. She did not argue. She did not leave immediately either. She sat there for another few minutes, and I let her. Before she stood to go, she said one more thing. Her voice was flat and very quiet. "I just didn't think you had it in you." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. "That was always the mistake." She left without hugging me. The door closed softly this time. One year after that birthday dinner, a woman named Harriet moved into the guest wing of my home. She was 64 years old. She had lost her husband to illness 2 years earlier and her home to the death that followed. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a potted plant she had carried on her lap in the car. I walked her through the house. I showed her how the back door sticks in the rain. I showed her Frank's garden, the roses along the fence, the herb beds along the south wall, the old apple tree in the corner that still produced more than either of us could eat. She stood in the garden and put her hand on the bark of the apple tree. She didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't need to. Nadine drove past the house occasionally. I saw her car slow, sometimes near the end of the driveway. She never came in. One morning, Harriet and I sat on the back porch drinking coffee and watching the light come up over the garden. She said quietly, "You must love this place." I thought about Frank. I thought about the birthday cake with the melting frosting. I thought about Becca's wilted flowers wrapped in a paper towel. "I do," I said. "That's exactly why it stays." The best gift was never the day I would be gone. It was the day I finally understood that I was still here, and I still had every right to act like it.